I just think when people hear natural, they think that it's safe and sustainable. And natural is not regulated. And I just encourage everybody to dig one layer deeper in the world natural.
Hey, Rum, what's going on?
Hey, Karl. Yeah, just coming off of the 4th of July, 250th semi-quintennial, which, by the way, was a question in trivia that I went to last week. What do you call the 250th? And I nailed it.
Oh, good for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I know our Grow Everything podcast listeners appreciate that you're able to say semis, whatever, a quintennial.
Yes, yes. Graduating the degree in chemistry, you learn how to say all sorts of interesting words, especially working in the pharmaceutical industry and all those drugs. So you get the linguistics down. But how are you doing, Karl? You were not in the US for 4th of July. Shame, shame.
I followed your footsteps up to Montreal for Jazz Fest. You caught the beginning of it and I caught the tail end of it. But we saw a bunch of little jazz bands, some old time jazz, some klezmer music, and then just really got to hang out in Griffintown, which is lovely. I got to speak a bunch of French, which made me very happy. And then walked along the not the river, but the canal where there's some locks and biked around, ate some great food, and just had a good time. And the big thing that we avoided was the Brooklyn Bridge fire, which you told me about.
Yeah, that happened. It was a quick fire. Of course, you see the headlines, you're like, Brooklyn Bridge on fire. And you're like, oh no, this is our bridge. But it was completely fine. It was like extinguished in a matter of minutes, but it looked pretty scary. So that happened. And then just like a few days later, did you see the Pfizer building that collapsing?
Yeah. So for our listeners who are not in New York City, the Pfizer building, which is in Midtown, has been under construction because it's being converted into apartments. There's a lot of office to residential conversions happening across the city, and the Pfizer building is one of them. And so a lot of times when it's written about or talked about on the news, it's named as a Pfizer building, even though Pfizer's not in there.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder what the comms team at Pfizer's doing because they keep putting the company's name in the headlines. And it's like, what is Pfizer doing? They have poor project management skills. Like, they can't even get a building up in Manhattan, but it's nothing to do with Pfizer, the company. I feel kind of bad. I wonder what their crisis communications team is doing. They are a great biotech company, so I feel a little bad about that. They've done a lot of innovation over the years.
Yeah, they were in that building for probably 50 years. It's a imposing structure. And what's been happening is crazy. When they show the pictures, they show these beams that are buckling. And apparently, like building inspectors neglected to do their job. So there's a lot of things that are being looked into. It makes me laugh because if one thing goes wrong, it sets up this snowball effect. And the next thing you know, Pfizer is being named in all these stories, even though they have nothing to do with this whole thing.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on it. A building going down in Manhattan is very scary. Nothing went down yet, so hopefully they can fix it without any huge implosion or anything, because I did see that word being thrown around, and I'm just like, whoa, let's see what happens, and hopefully it can get fixed.
I don't even know if they do implosions anymore. When I lived in Boston a long time ago, whenever they were going to implode a building, they would announce it and a huge crowd of people would show up to see it. I probably saw 3 buildings go down in Boston. I saw a few go down in Denver, which is very impressive. There's a old church that's in my neighborhood that's being dismantled. I think that what they do these days is dismantle buildings from the top down, or as we've seen in Dumbo where our office is, they will remove the outside of the building and just leave the infrastructure, the beams and the floors, and then build around it, which I think is a fascinating reuse of buildings. We could grow all that stuff. That's what it should be.
There we go. Nice transition there. Grow everything, grow buildings. Yeah. And then, I mean, of course, right now it's the World Cup fever. Everyone is just watching these games. There's a lot of watch parties all over the place, rooting for their favorite countries. USA is out of the running, unfortunately. But I've been watching the ads that happen between all the action, all this, I was going to say soccer, but I'll say football for the world.
During the hydration breaks, you mean?
Yeah, during the hydration breaks. I love that. Everyone stay hydrated. But there was this one ad, and Matthew McConaughey was narrating it. And the way that he was starting, he's like, it's America in the heartland. And I think the ad was specifically for Fox Sports. And I was like cooking at the time. And I just said out loud, I was like, he's going to talk about soil. And then he was like, and then our soil. And he said it right after I called it. And I was like, yes. And I'm like, how did I think that? And my husband was, yeah, that was like a really good call. And it's because Matthew McConaughey is a part of this documentary called Common Ground. And actually, Karl, like one of their agents, had reached out to us to have the director on the podcast. And I don't know, hopefully we can get them on, but it's about regenerative agriculture. And soil is a big part of that. It's something that we will be talking a lot more about because soil is so hot right now. Like everyone's talking about soil. It's just so fascinating. It's underrated, I think, in terms of solutions and how to really help with everything, with carbon sequestration, with obviously like agriculture, plants, health, heat, all of it. And I think this is going to be very topical for us in the next few episodes. We have done some interviews already, so teasing the idea that we will be talking about the hottest thing right now, soil.
Which is soil. And so we've talked about the heat because it's been really hot. Last week, we talked about the heat dome in Europe. I mentioned this New York City urban forest plan. And then as we were heading into the 4th of July, our friends at 4A Biosciences, who've been on the podcast, announced their plan to help bring back the American chestnut. Did you see this?
I didn't, but I know that this has been an initiative for other people that we know, like Will Canine, who was the co-founder, leader of Opentrons.
Yeah, he is super interested. A lot of people are very interested in the American chestnut because it was one of the most abundant and economically valuable trees in North America. And the way I understand it is at the beginning of the 20th century, so some 120 years ago, there were 4 billion trees lost following the introduction of an infection, chestnut blight. And so it basically made the species functionally extinct, and it completely altered the forest ecosystem, wild habitats, and rural economies. And if you look up pictures of American chestnuts, they're very impressive. They're not the size of the redwoods in California, but they're very large. And they were very important to the Native American people because the chestnuts themselves are very nutritious. Congratulations to Ashley and her team at 4A for doing this, because I'm very excited. Now the question is, how will the public react to the planting of these somewhat modified, chestnut trees?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely stay tuned for that. I think we're very pro biotech solutions here on the podcast and all of our episodes, because we really see this as an innovation that could help many aspects of different industries. But there are also ethical concerns. There's biosecurity that needs to be taken into consideration. And we always talk about a life cycle analysis, all right? So if you bring something into this world, what happens while it exists? How do other organisms interact with it? How does it affect our human population, the planet? So I think this is something that we need to be a little bit more vigilant on how biotech is being deployed. New biotech solutions are being deployed in nature.
There's interest from the public. And in many cases, the public doesn't really understand the technologies. And as a result, people are afraid. And we've seen it in the biocolor space. We've talked about it. There's a whole organization that's out there saying that biocolors are genetically modified. They're not. Or if you produce them in yeast, they're genetic engineered. That is still not safe. That's not true. So I think this is one of those things where it's like we want to watch it and keep you, our listeners, informed on it, because we're the ones who are on the front lines telling everybody this stuff is safe. It's got to be safe. The releases into nature are limited, and there's a lot that we can do to educate the public on the benefits. Interestingly, I had a conversation with someone yesterday who was talking about modified insects, which is much more complicated, but there are, for example, sterile mosquitoes being released in places where there's malaria. And what they said to me is that people are much more open to these things now than they were, say, 20 or 30 years ago. And I think it's a combination of the companies educating the public better and people being more open, especially since they know that we need every kind of climate solution that is available to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So stay tuned. We're doing our part, but you have to do your part. And stay tuned to the episode and share this podcast with other people. There we go.
Yeah. Okay, so just a couple more things before we get into the interview. We talk about biomanufacturing a lot. We recently had an episode with Senator Todd Young of Indiana talking about biomanufacturing in the United States. And so we pay a lot of attention to and have worked with companies in China. And Dirk Vanderklee writes a Substack called BioBrawl that covers the emergence and the growth of biotech in China. And he just wrote a really interesting Substack about the number of facilities that are being constructed across China. It's really like the full stack of biomanufacturing for target molecules. A lot of it is food related. And in the article, he basically talks about $500 million worth of money being invested in these construction projects. What Clay points out is that industrial biotech can produce a lot more products than just batteries, EVs, and solar combined. And he also points out this pipeline of industrial biotech is really setting up the infrastructure for manufacturing for the next few decades. So it's something we continue to pay a lot of attention to.
For sure. We had this conversation about US versus China when it comes to biomanufacturing during DC Climate Week. It's a live episode. I recommend you guys listen to it because we had 3 investors and on a panel during this live recording. And one of the investors had pointed out that there is a very coordinated effort, just like this gentleman pointed out in the Substack, that there's 25 pilot plants that are commissioned to be open this year, next year, which is really fast. China's known for fast manufacturing.
China's speed is a thing.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to find out what are the products that are the first to be manufactured. Is it going to be industrial chemicals on that side? Or is it going to be like biotech beauty ingredients? Something we definitely want to pay attention to. And then it's like, who is actually manufacturing or commissioning those plants and working to get their products manufactured? Are they strictly China companies, or are they actually United States companies that are working with Chinese companies? And maybe the Chinese companies are making some early chemicals or precursors that they then sell to United States to make some more advanced molecules or biochemicals that we need for our products. So it's very interesting to see. I always like to think that everything's about collaboration, but collaboration, competition is part of the game.
For sure.
Part of the game.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you want to say about this Siphonophore?
Karl, there's another thing I wanted to point out because I love going on to Instagram and I've been seeing a lot more biology content and the algorithm's starting to know me very well. And I saw this reel about this, it looked like a very weird long creature. And it was actually the longest animal that's been discovered so far. It's called a siphonophore, and it is the longest animal. It was found in the seas, in the deep seas. And this is something that I think about a lot because for all of the innovation and interest that's happening for space travel, we need a lot of that to go into the deep seas because we know that there's a lot of space to cover in space, but there's less space to cover in the seas compared relative to space. But we have a lot of evolution and biology that's been happening for millions of years in the deep seas. So what is down there? Hopefully good things. But if there's bad things like the Kraken down there, we need to know now so we can prepare. But it's just like, oh, and 2020, we found out that there's this very, very long animal. And you have to look at it. We'll put a link in the show notes, but it's like one long connected organism that has a lot of little organisms that are attached to it. So it's like almost a decentralized type of situation happening where there's individual organisms and that are connected to one large organism, like a slime mold or something, but definitely worth looking into. I love when we find new creatures. They're very inspiring. How do they work? How do they function? What can we learn from them to make our worlds better, more delightful, more safe, more exciting?
Yeah, that's super interesting, Erum. I love anything that has to do with the deep ocean. Again, it's unexplored territory that is right in our backyard, and there's so much that we can learn from it. Speaking of the deep sea, the company that we are interviewing actually created a product based on sharks. In the past, shark squalene was extracted from the livers of sharks, and that was used in many cosmetic products. And Amyris, which is an early bioindustrial company, was the first to create a synthetic version of squalane, which is molecularly identical to squalene, but produced in yeast using sugarcane. And I'm thrilled that we're going to have Lisa Roessler, the Chief Commercial Officer of Amyris, on the podcast to talk to us about what she's doing. She's been on the global commercial leadership side of biotech and chemical companies for more than 35 years. She was previously at Evonik. She was at DuPont. She's led sales, marketing, and growth teams across major businesses. And we're super excited to have Lisa come on and talk to about what's going on at Amyris. Lisa Ressler of Amyris, we are so excited to have you on the Go Everything podcast.
Oh, thanks so much, Karl. I'm really, really excited and honored to be here.
All right, so let's start off getting to know you a little bit for our guests who don't. You spent nearly 30 years at DuPont and Evonik managing these legacy multi-billion-dollar chemical portfolios. What was the catalyst for you that made you leap from that established world of traditional industrial chemicals into leading commercial growth for a synthetic biology pioneer, Amyris?
Yeah, so I have to say the shift to biotechnology is really pretty straightforward. Engineers are always trying to look for better ways to do things. And I think just as human citizens, we should all be thinking about doing things in a better way that preserves our planet, preserves lives, and just is better for all of us in addition to manufacturing better products. I think about biofermentation as the hosts for actually perfect little chemical plants. And so the jump from chemical manufacturing in terms of manufacturing plants to biofermentation is not a huge leap. It's just how it's done. And I just love to think about it that way. Coming to Amyris specifically, I have to say I was dazzled, having spent nearly 35 years in science and science companies, to see what Amyris was doing. So blown away by the science and the innovation that's happening when I got a chance to see it. But the thing that really sold me was meeting the people and the culture here. This team so wants to transform the world and do the right things and do good, and want to see the impact of their really smart work come into life. And so getting that sense when I got to meet the team was very helpful. And last, I will say, because it's not really last, it was first for me, it was belief in Kathy Portman as the new CEO and leader. I've known Kathy for 35 years, and our professional lives have intertwined. She is a very strong leader with a lot of good business sense, but she's very transparent, very true, very value-centered. And getting to work for a leader like that was just the icing on the cake of getting to come to Amyris.
Wow, yeah. That resonates with me because I work with Karl and he's also a very amazing person to work with. So
Thank
it's
you.
so important to work with great people. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you because we could talk about the tech side, we could talk about business and commercialization. But before we get into sales strategies and what you're working on the day-to-day, could you help our listeners visualize what Amyris actually produces? So if a consumer uses a personal care product formulated with your, for example, your precision fermented squalane, what would they physically experience that makes it perform better than traditional alternatives?
Oh, fantastic question. So let me start a little bit about who Amyris is, because it's not so easy to understand given that we've had such a shift in business models. But Amyris has fully scaled 16 commercial molecules or ingredients. And so as an ingredient supplier, that's one thing that's easy to sense and touch and to know what we mean by that. But we also offer bioservices in the industry in the form of R&D collaborations. So if somebody has a chemical they would like to access, and we are willing to undertake and collaborate together with partners from an R&D perspective to access those through biofermentation. We also, because we've gone through and spent over 20 years doing this process development and scale up, we are also willing to work with partners to scale up their products. We are experts in process development, and we are experts in scale up. So we have a lot of piloting facilities. We have a lot of analytical equipment. We have a lot of people who have walked through this. And we're absolutely willing to work with corporations who have that interest to scale something, because we really believe we're able to do it faster and cheaper than they could do on their own. And so We think about somebody wants to move forward with a product that's biofermented, but they don't yet know if the market's going to accept it. We're a great place to come test that out, get product scaled, maybe even avoid CapEx for the first couple of years because we can see the market and see if the market's really there and help them get the products to market. And then finally, again, we'll talk some more about it. We are a manufacturer. We've got 1.5 million liters of fermentation capacity sitting in Barra Bonita. And so, of course, we love it when we get the chance to also make those ingredients too.
Amazing. And just so our listeners know, and correct me if I'm wrong, Barra Bonita is in Brazil, right?
That's correct. It's in Sao Paulo State, yes.
This is like a really interesting time to be talking to you, Lisa, because we've been seeing this major shift when consumer brands are trying to strip so many petrochemicals out of their ingredients. From your perspective, is that a gradual cosmetic trend, or are we witnessing something that's really a permanent commercial transformation across all of chemistry?
So we really believe that this type of technology will transform across industries. And it is happening across industries, but it's gradual. So different markets have different acceptance and needs. So if you think about things like personal care and nutraceuticals and food and beverage, consumers demand better for what they put on their bodies, on their skin, what they take into their bodies. And so there's a lot of push all the way to the consumer in those markets that demands to understand where those chemicals come from. It's good for the person, but it's also good for the planet. And we see a lot of that being the first places that this is being accepted. You're very well aware that's also happening in pharma, where it is a better process to be able to scale through biofermentation and other biotechnologies. I do have a belief that there are other specific industries where supply chain stability will drive the conversion. It won't necessarily be the consumer demanding it, but there's a lot of things happening in our world today with climate change as an example. And so we get a lot of natural products from plants that will become less and less abundant or have supply chain risks where we can ferment those from sugar and have stable supply, consistent supply. You don't see pricing going up and down based on whether it was a good year for a crop or not, right? So that stable supply will be another value driver that pushes us into markets beyond where it's being used today. But ultimately, for petrochem-based products, there has to be a performance driver. And so I believe that conversion is coming. It's coming with time, but it has to be a performance driver. And so what we're also seeing that there are new molecules that you're able to design through biofermentation with an extra alcohol group or an extra double bond, right? It doesn't necessarily exist in nature today or deriving from traditional petrochemicals, where we can actually design performance benefits. And that's what I think will actually drive into the other industries and drive that transformation.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. It's a song that we sing here on Grow Everything, that performance needs to trump sustainability. And I hate to say it that way, but it is for the commercial benefits because there's a need and there's a novelty there and it could sell. Unfortunately, sustainability hasn't been doing that well in terms of a selling point, but things could change. And I'm glad you're talking about that. So, you mentioned earlier that there's been a reboot at Amyris in a way that, have a new CEO, and it famously restructured to step away from more of this direct-to-consumer beauty brand and return to its original roots as a pure B2B industrial biotech company. So my question is, what part of this business model reboot do you find resonates most with global corporate partners who need massive, reliable supply chains?
Yeah, so first, I do want to acknowledge what you brought up because people are very curious when we talk about Amyris, and there is a history there. And Amyris was both a science company as well as a B2C consumer brand company. Those are both really difficult companies to run with very different competence behind them. And you both know there are many companies that try to do either one of those things and do them well, and they still don't survive. Trying to do both of them at the same time, really difficult. So when we sat back coming out of chapter 11, and thought about what are we good at? What are we unique? It's about delivering the science. It is really owning that access through biology to get to the chemistries that are needed. And so we think about being a B2B science company. We then think about what are those business models? Are we going to be R&D collaborators? Are we trying to help people scale? Are we trying to supply ingredients? And so you ask what resonates, and I really believe it's the uniqueness that Amyris can bring in that end to end, all the way from concept and strain engineering to tons and kilotons of products going out the door, and being able to do that end to end in one company. Because I can imagine when you go from strain development to process development, there's an iteration there, right? Because things like being able to get rid of impurities in your process development, you can go back to the strain and redesign it so the purity is not there, right? So there's an absolute iteration that has to happen. And then there's an iteration between process development and manufacturing that also has to happen. And so having it within one company is quite a unique value proposition right now in biotechnology in general. And we believe that uniqueness and what we bring from the core strain engineering all the way to the ability to scale is the uniqueness that resonates with our customers.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm glad you kind of spoke about the difference between a company that's doing science versus one that's developing a product, or the one that is trying to do everything at once, which is extremely challenging. And we know that a lot of biotech startups fail because they can't commercialize their molecules at a competitive price point. They're competing against petrochemistry in many cases, and many of the products are ultra commoditized, especially in the world of chemicals. So what's the secret to moving a biomanufactured ingredient past the green premium into true high volume market adoption?
Yeah, so I would say it's not a secret. I talk about this quite a bit with our teams, and I say, you can Google this stuff. It's not a secret. But fundamentally, what needs to be true is there has to be a market need. Fundamentally, there's a market need. You need to match it with what we uniquely can do as a company, right? And what are we good at? And that we're not stretching so far outside of our boundaries. That has to be true. I call this the Venn diagram. There's three things that have to be true: the market need. What do we uniquely bring to meet that market need? But there has to be value to be able to pay for it. And it's that third one that I think people struggle to find those applications, because you talked about scaling to commodity. I really believe the way to do this is to go after those ones where you have very high value. And where you do have those high value applications, we can maybe talk about a few of those. It's not just substitution with a green premium. It's that you really are bringing value, whether, again, it's stable supply chain, it can be lower cost, but you're bringing performance, and you have to bring that value or this won't work. Fundamentally, my belief is if you go after the high value applications, and we've seen this time and time again with science, you've got some scale, you've got others who are attracted to come build improvements, and you have an ecosystem that then drives your economics to then go after things that are commodity. And in my lifetime, I've thought about examples. I was going to go all the way from the mainframe to our iPhone and things like that. But in my lifetime, I think about GPS. And I really remember the very first time I got my $300 Garmin that sat on the dashboard, and I was so excited about it. But the transformation from very high value naval applications for which it was created to all of a sudden it's available to a consumer who's willing to pay $300 or $400 to have it in their vehicle. And it was quite a novelty, and not everybody afforded to go get the Garmin. To all of a sudden it's in our phones and it's in our cars, and that transformation, I really believe, is coming for biotechnology in general and biofermentation. So what needs to happen is all three things that I talked in the Venn diagram need to be true, which means going after high value. Then the ecosystem develops to drive cost out and drive volumes, and then you can scale to more commodity and transform industries.
That's great. And thanks for that transformation story. I mean, the GPS story is a great one. Let's talk about some action that's happening at Amyris. You guys recently announced a partnership with Wacker to develop bio-based functional ingredients for personal care, which we love talking about. How do you navigate that unique commercial challenge of blending Amyris's cutting edge biology with Wacker's century old expertise in traditional chemical formulation? So, biology and chemistry, they butt heads. I was actually a chemistry major, and the biology students were another building, and we would play against each other in powder puff. And like, it's always this like button heads. But now here you are, you guys are collaborating. Tell us more about that partnership.
First of all, I'll mention Wacker because I really think that they are a great example of a company that's 125 years old. They are a manufacturing company. They make silicones and silanes all the way from sand. They are a true manufacturing company. But they've caught on to the idea that biotechnology is a wave of the future. And they've been investing for well over 20 years. And they are deeply rooted in their own transformation. If I take a question a little more broadly about how do you get through this challenge, I don't see it as a commercial challenge. What I see it as is two puzzle pieces that are really coming together, and that each half of the partnership have to bring something unique. And this is the way we've approached all of our partnerships in the last few years. And we have quite a few of them that we're really proud of, in addition to Wacker, that we're also super excited about. But what they really bring is a deep understanding of the needed attributes in the application. So Wacker in personal care, as an example, they are an amazing silicone company, right? They understand the applications for hair care and skin care, et cetera, based on their experience in silicones. And so what they bring is the deep understanding and the knowledge of those applications and what's needed from a chemistry perspective. And they bring that access to the industry. What Amyris brings on the other side is whether we can access that chemistry through biology. And to me, when you can get in that room and they can talk application and attributes translated to chemistry, and then we can match that conversation by talking about access to that chemistry through biology, we're each bringing unique pieces together. And it's like magic when it's a translation in languages when you've got the biologists and the chemists that are talking about what's needed to really transform there. And we like to call it bench to bench collaborations because it is a chemistry bench to a biology bench. But the tension that you described, I think if you can put that aside in terms of how you're approaching the problem and you think about what is the better approach, really some very encouraging conversations that happen with our technology teams.
Yeah, that's amazing. Another piece of Amyris news, earlier you mentioned this production facility that you have in Brazil at Barra Bonita, and you recently added a fourth production line there. I'd love to give our listeners a sense of what that looks like. And then as Chief Commercial Officer, how does having that kind of physical capacity expansion change the conversations you're having with risk-averse enterprise clients?
I'm so happy that I get to represent my manufacturing colleagues and what they're doing at the plant because it really is, I'm feeling trite using the word partnership, but we are one team, one fight, and they are just amazing colleagues to work with. But the facilities, absolutely world-class, a manufacturing marvel. And as you said, I've spent 35 years around chemical manufacturing plants. And to get to see what was built and that I get the opportunity to talk about is just fantastic. As I mentioned, you talked about there's 4 lines. We now have about 1.5 million liters of manufacturing capacity there. And what's so fascinating to me is as they're running that facility, they're generating 1 billion pieces of data a day.
Oh, wow.
So just a science marvel. It's a professional organization, and they really focus on using things like Six Sigma and lean methodology to drive discipline and excellence. And it becomes a major part of our dependability as a supplier as part of this iterative scale that I described before. And it differentiates us both in credibility, but also I'll talk about the new line, but also in flexibility. So the new capacity helps us in scale, of course, but it is an 80 cubic meter line, where the other three lines that we have are 200 cubic meters each, which is quite a scale. So with the 80 cubic meter, it allows us to take on projects that maybe don't economically already scale to the 200. So it does give us additional capacity, but what it brings to our partners is the ability to go more in a stepwise way to be able to economically produce at a smaller scale. So it gives us flexibility, and that's the piece that we get to sell. It's fantastic.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I seem to remember that the facility is either in a giant sugar field or near a giant sugar field. Where is it in Brazil? Like, give us the picture.
So it's in Sao Paulo State, but if you know Sao Paulo City, it's southwest between 3 and 4 hours, depending on whether it's raining or not. It is sitting absolutely in the middle of the sugar field. We are across the street from a sugar mill that helps us because they actually do things like generate steam. And so we're co-located in a very remote area, but all of the resources that we need are actually right there from a low cost perspective. That's really helpful for us.
That's amazing.
Yeah, we have to go down there.
Yeah, it's part of our path to Netflix.
We'd love to invite you. And I actually am going there next week with our commercial team, which is, I've gotten a chance to host customers there. It's when somebody does get the chance to see it and the scale of it, 5 stories high with it, it's marvelous.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll plan it. We'll plan it. Amyris is shifting to develop proprietary molecules entirely in-house alongside its historical joint development partnerships. So how do you commercially evaluate which biological molecules you should keep exclusive to Amyris versus which ones you should license out to the broader market? How do you make that determination? I think that would really help a lot of the entrepreneurs who listen to the podcast.
Yeah. So of course we still love our partnerships. But what we try to do is look at molecules that we can access with high productivity, either because we're working on something that's in that same pathway, we've made a discovery, and all of a sudden we've unlocked, now we have a new molecule that we can access and we want to go shop, as an example. And so if it becomes economically viable, and there might not be a natural partner, for instance, there might not be somebody who has a large market share, or because it hasn't been accessible or abundant, there's not a natural leader. May make the choice to take that on. Right now, we're in the midst of launching a product called Miraclex 50 that's a fully scaled emollient that we produced already at scale. And we're out talking in the value chain to various partners, and they're assessing the product, and we're mapping the value chain to say what it really is the right way for this to come to market, fully Amyris owned product that we're launching. What I really like, and I talked about one team, one fight with our manufacturing partners, is with the technology organization. And they have approached, my colleague Sunil Chandra likes to call the 80-50-0. And what that means is that when a partner is able to knock on our door and they identify a chemistry and molecule that they're interested in, that our vision would be to have 80% of the work done, or 50% of those cases, on day 0. So the day they knock on our door, we've already done a lot of the pathway work, so that we're not reinventing the wheel every time that we start taking on a new project. And I love that concept because, as you can imagine, over the 23-year history, we have created a lot of those pathways. And we worked even with the US government to identify what is accessible through our chemistry. And I will tell you, our technology organization just a few months ago, it strained 100,000. So we've got a lot of history and data and understanding of the pathways. But this sort of mindset of having it almost ready when the partner knocks on the door, in a lot of the cases, it's invaluable to the commercial team. It's invaluable to our partners. So I love that. The one caveat I want to make sure I mention is that, again, we love to have partners who come in and work with us on those targets. They help us co-develop. There's a lot of benefits to them. They can be first movers in the market. They get input to the design. They get preferential pricing. But when we do the work ourselves, we retain a lot of the power in terms of who are we going to work with and what is the business model and what does pricing look like, because we've done that on our own. So there's a lot of advantage to partners working with us instead of just waiting for us to create it, bring it to them. But it will be a balance of both of those.
You mentioned this emollient. That's a newer ingredient. Can you give our listeners an idea of the breadth of different molecules you guys are producing and maybe some that we're probably using today?
Thanks for asking that. So in personal care, we do have a number of emollients. Squalane's the most famous, I think, that you had mentioned earlier, where we produce that from sugar cane rather than coming from shark livers. Yeah. So it's about saving lives, even if it's the life of a shark, it's still an important life.
Very
Sharks' lives
important.
matter.
Yeah.
And so we make squalane and a product called hemisqualane that's used more in hair care than skin care. And we have other active beauty ingredients. I think you might be familiar with bisabolol.
I don't know. What is that? I don't know that one.
It's actually not a huge volume blockbuster, but it goes after all of the things that you would expect an active to do in terms of firmness, younger looking skin, hydration, etc. So we have a portfolio that we're continuing to develop from a personal care perspective in both emollients, which are functionals on the active side, and we are working on scaling up some additional actives currently. We have a number of flavors and fragrances, and so we make patchouli. It's a wonderful smelling molecule. Sandalwood, 3 or 4 other derivatives that go into things like lily of the valley and other types of flavors and fragrances. We are making precursors for pharma. So we make squalene, which is different than squalane, as a precursor in a partnership with Croda. So Croda takes our starting material, further processes it using CGMP, and makes just a fantastic incipient for vaccines. These vaccines today are using squalene, again, that comes from sharks, and we're bringing in a plant-derived equivalent that helps with scale and stability. And you imagine when you have a crisis, let's cross our fingers and hope that doesn't happen again, but you need to scale vaccine manufacturing quickly. Here's something you can do at a scale in any of the regions very quickly, right? So love that product, and it gives us a foray into pharma. And we have our history is also in pharma. The way Amyris was started was with artemisinin. So that's a vaccine for malaria. And Bill and Melinda Gates funded that original work. And then once we were able to make the artemisinin, actually release the IP so that those products can be manufactured to be able to really go after malaria at the time. That's our history. We are also in some collaborations with partners in specialty materials. More than one company is interested in unique molecules that can help in adhesives. And as you imagine, electronics specifically is a big deal for novel performance materials. I didn't mention agriculture. We've got one product that's it's an insecticide, but it doesn't kill bugs. What it does is attracts bugs that are natural predators, and those bugs kill the bad bugs. So it's really interesting, again, when you think about approaches and what our mission is and what we try to do, making something that's poisonous and kills things is not necessarily in our mission, but I love that it attracts the right kind of insects to make that happen. Very cool work.
I love that. Yeah, we have like squalene on our shelves here, and like every time I use it, I think about Amyris. So it's for those of us who know where it comes from, at least I always think about Amyris and that pioneering work, and in terms of, I guess, liberating our dependence on sharks, saving sharks' lives. I want to go back to your background a little bit. Again, you start off really trained as a classical chemical engineer, and you were at Carnegie Mellon and Pitt. But what was the biggest cultural shocks for you when you moved from that kind of traditional engineering mindset to working in a company that is focused and works with living, evolving microorganisms instead of like mixing chemicals in beakers?
For me, the culture shock didn't come from the manufacturing or the operations because at the heart, it's still controlled unit operations that behave in a predictable, repeatable way. So that part of it wasn't the culture shock for me personally. It's just I come from a place of deep processes, structures, clear value propositions, roles and responsibilities about what everybody does when you've got 35,000 or 50,000 people in a company. You need to have that. What I think about in terms of what we're all trying to do around biotechnology, there's more of a startup mentality. And so there's a lot of variables here. And we're talking about some of them today in the markets and the business models and what companies doing what, and a lot of them transform and change. And so there's a lot of companies that I'll use the word scrappy, right? You piece it together to make it happen. And I feel that so much in this company. We are not a startup anymore, but there's a startup heart here. And so a lot of these companies are very scrappy in how they're approaching this transformation. And what I like about Amyris is right now we're beyond startup. And that with the new leadership that we brought in, I had mentioned Kathy, our manufacturing leader, Adam Blasiak. I can't believe I didn't mention him already, came from Givaudan. You learned my background, but we're bringing in that rigor into the business and all of the aspects from the financials perspective, technically making choices about what do we work on, manufacturing and bringing in that process orientation, and even our commercial practices. We're trying to bring in best practices that you've learned from some of these big companies. So we have great novel science and we have scaled. And I like to think about Amyris being the grown up in the room, but we're improving every day to be able to flange up what we have to the expectations of those industries, right? Because they do think differently. And so I really think that's part of a view of where we are. But that was a bit of a culture shock for me to step out of those large corporations into every decision matters in what we're doing. I love it.
It's great that you've been working at these legacy companies that are very large, and Amherst has this rich history, and yet you guys have adopted this startup mentality where you have to be innovating and flexible and trying to get ahead. I love the scrappiness. I mean, that really helps. The hunger, the drive, and really the vision, right? You always equate startups with like having the big vision of the future. So my next question is about that. What role do you think precision fermentation will play in global consumer goods? And what do you think needs to happen commercially to make bio-based chemistry invisible for manufacturing rather than a premium marketing claim?
I really believe that this move from targeting just high value applications to being broadly preferred is really where we're going. And when we talk about what it is at Amyris we're trying to do, and it is about transforming industries, you have to keep your eye on that. But with any technology, there needs to be a change in the entire ecosystem, right? One company is not going to be able to drive it end to end. So I see two really big things that will help enable this. One is that we're going to continue to see advances in technology, like downstream processing, continuous processing versus batch, using AI. There's so much that we're doing right now using AI that even in the last 6 months has transformed how we're working. And those things will all help make what we're doing better for manufacturing, driving out costs, helping with scaling. Once you do scale, you drive out more costs. All of that will come together, and it will not be a single company that does that, right? There's a lot of enabling technologies. But in addition to that, there's market dynamics that are being created by climate change, geopolitical pressures that are happening, and the next best alternatives that are out there today will ultimately change, and their economics are going to change, and their availability is going to change. And so then you start looking at an alternate technology like biofermentation that is easily scalable in the great scheme of things, right? It's an easily scalable technology, and that makes this become the right answer. And so it's dynamics that change in the market and dynamics that change in technology that will come together and absolutely drive this to a broadly preferred technology. Believe that completely.
Yeah, I love that. I think one of the things that people who are outside of this industry don't realize that once you engineer an organism, you've basically created a factory that replicates itself, and you can ship that factory basically anywhere. We know it's all relative, but you can ship that factory anywhere and scale it up if what the process is. So we've hit the part of the interview where we're going to ask you a bunch of quick fire questions. I'll kick it off and ask one, and then you can answer. We try to keep them very quick and fun. Your answer could be as short or as long as you'd like. But what's one marketing myth about natural beauty ingredients that you wish would disappear forever?
I just think when people hear natural, they think that it's safe and sustainable. And natural is not regulated. And I just encourage everybody to dig one layer deeper in the world natural and understand really where your products are coming from to find out if natural means better for you.
Yeah. Poison ivy's natural.
Yeah. Yeah. Rattlesnake venom is too.
Some people will inject it in their faces if you tell them it'll make them prettier.
Oh my gosh. Don't even. I just watched The Substance. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what people will do. What people do for beauty. Okay. Here's the next question. All right. What is one legacy ingredient that is a total eco-criminal and needs to go?
So it's not one ingredient, but it's a classic chemistry. It's any defluorinated chemistries, right? Your PFAS, and they're challenging for the ozone layer. They're challenging in that they're in our blood, causing really documented changes to our health. But what I really like is biotechnology, I think, will be part of the answer for some of those applications and part of the answer for the cleanup. And so it's challenging stuff that's made our lives easier. We just didn't realize all the environmental and human impact for it.
Yeah. Finish this sentence. The future of global chemical manufacturing will be built by
microbes. Let's grow everything.
Yay! Oh my God. Okay, that has to be a clip for sure.
I hope so.
Yes, yeah. I'm glad you didn't say built by Amyris, but you could have. We would have accepted that answer too. Okay, final question. So if Amyris yeast strains had a corporate theme song, what would it be?
So I'm again dating myself, but I'm an 80s music fan because that was back when I was in my prime. Love 80s music. So I'm going to go with Def Leppard. Pour some sugar on me.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
That's a party song.
Yeah, exactly. Take me back to college. Okay. Yeah, memories. Oh, so fun. This was so much fun. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on the Grow Everything podcast. I just loved hearing about everything from the history to the innovation and what's happening now from both the science side and the commercial side. We really appreciate your voice here on the Grow Everything podcast.
And I'm so honored to be here. And I really think we can be transforming industries. Everybody's just got their piece to play. It comes together.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Lisa. Really appreciate it.
We've been talking to a lot of people across different podcasts, and we've come across this really great podcast called Smart Tea. Let's hear from them.
Hi, I'm Arthia Sundi, host of Smart Tea, a science history podcast that tells the stories of the people behind the world's greatest discoveries. Join my co-hosts and I as we chat about scientists like Percy Spencer, the 5th grade school dropout who invented the microwave, or Frances Kelsey, who only got into grad school because her name sounded like a boy's, and then went on to work at the FDA where she prevented the thalidomide crisis in the US. If that sounds like your cup of tea, check out the Smart Tea podcast. Talk to you soon.
Hey, this episode is sponsored by Messaging Lab. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling business narratives. And we have done so for the most successful biotech-forward companies across pharma, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice and elevate your business, Visit us at messaginglab.com. Let's grow. So, Karl, what'd you think of that episode?
Okay, so that was so much fun. I think there's some great clips that are going to come out of that one. And the fact that Amyris has gone through bankruptcy, has come back from the dead, is positioning itself as a scaled company says a lot to where the industry is and where it's going to go. She emphasized that this Brazilian facility that they have, which I've known about for many years, produces 1.5 million liters of capacity. And now they're adding another smaller volume line that's going to make partner scale up more flexible. And I think this goes back to what we're talking about with all these developments in China. Having a company like Amyris available to produce much more makes it easier for other partners to come in and use their facilities. What do you think, Erum?
I was waiting for this interview. I was so curious because Amyris has been around for a while, right? We need these wins. And you said come back from the dead. I don't know if they were dead. I think
Okay, yeah, I shouldn't have. I apologize.
no, it's okay. Which is more like maybe not as on a growth trajectory, maybe repositioning themselves, perhaps. And we've seen this. Apple was kind of quiet a bit in the 80s and 90s, and they came back.
No, they almost died. I remember like
They almost died, yeah.
the, Business Week front cover saying, will Apple die?
Yeah, there we go. So that's straight up reporting right there. So it's great to see these companies that kind of withstand, they work and they collaborate to continue to provide new innovation and products to our ecosystem, to the economy. I do think that this idea of the partnership models, and Lisa did a great job of really walking us through how they are co-developing with partners. They're having these pilot plans, which again, like you mentioned, that's a China strategy to also have pilot plans so you can de-risk the scale up. And so you understand how these ferments operate on larger scales, if that's the tool that they're using. I mean, there's also cell-free, there's other tools, but that's the bread and butter for a lot of biotech is the fermentation process. They are also continuing to launch proprietary molecules in-house. So that really shows that they're diversifying, they're going to have strong economics, and these economics is not just them, it's them with partners.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I thought was key to what Lisa talked about is the fact that many of the customers that come to Amyris are not really ready for full industrial scale. And Amyris is able to hold their hands and support them as they go from, say, lab to bigger production to very large production. And I think that's really important, particularly for companies that are looking at biotech as a solution, but don't really understand how they can scale. So having a partner like Amyris that has scaled and is willing to do that kind of stepwise work, I think is really important.
Yeah, and they're also, of course, leveraging AI. So what their AI-enabled manufacturing, what is that AI learning? How can they use that to support other companies? I think there's a lot going on there. We would love to see how it's continuing to power the manufacturing of new molecules. And again, they, of course, something that we say a lot in the podcast, they focus on molecules and their performance. So it's not just about sustainability, which again, we love sustainability here, but performance wins. And we want to make sure that these molecules are functioning for customers. And so I really want to learn more about how they are using AI, and it'd be great to have someone from Amyris talk about that.
Yeah, I think we have to have Lisa back on. She was a lot of fun. She talked about the strong value-based framing of biotech, whether that's this idea of replacing shark-derived squalene, rethinking pest control, calling out PFAS-style chemistry. She really framed biotech as both a commercial platform and a cleaner industrial alternative. We know that's true. You who are listening to us know that as well. We want more people to understand that biomanufacturing is the future. It is clean, and we want to see a lot more of it. So I'm looking forward to having Lisa back on. She was a lot of fun. And I just love that you and she were on the same page when it came to karaoke.
Yes. Yeah. That was so much fun. Okay. So thank you so much for listening. We want to mention two things. One, of course, is the World Biomarkets. It's happening in Omaha, Nebraska in September. We would love to see you there. World Biomarkets has offered a 25% discount for anyone that wants to come. If you hear this podcast, use the code GROWEVERYTHING to join and get that discount for attending. Next week, Karl and I will be at the workshop on computationally designed organisms. This is a workshop that I went to last year. The leaders of this are Mike Levin and Joshua Bongard, two amazing professors. You guys heard our episode with Mike Levin, which was mind-blowing. If you did not hear that, I highly recommend listening to Mike Levin speak about biology. Big takeaway from this whole workshop and computationally designed organisms is that's looking at organisms and how they function from the high phenotypic levels versus a lot of what biotech is looking at the molecular gene level. So it's coming at biology from a different perspective, and I cannot wait to see what they discovered and what updates they have from this workshop next week, and we'll be sure to fill you in.
Awesome. So thank you for tuning into the Grow Everything podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please do reach out to us. We appreciate and we answer every comment that we receive. Our contact information is in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe to our Substack. Let's grow.
Let's grow.